Security, throw him out. Adrian gets the presidential suite tonight.
You banned me from my own hotel? Madam, he owns the entire $45 billion chain.
What? He owns it all?
My wife took the presidential suite key from my hand, placed it in Adrian Vale's palm, and told hotel security to escort me downstairs before I embarrassed her again. Adrian smiled as if he had just won something valuable. None of them knew the suite had been reserved under the name I had spent 12 years hiding or that the building around us answered to it. Lauren kept her voice low enough to sound controlled and loud enough for the guests near the private check-in desk to hear. Ethan, please don't make this worse. Adrian's hosting investors tonight. You can stay somewhere practical. She glanced at my city-issued inspection jacket as if the reflective strip offended the marble floor. Beside her, Adrian wore a charcoal suit with no tie. The calculated uniform of a man who wanted everyone to know he was too important for ceremony. He held the key packet between two fingers. I'm sure Mr. Cole understands, he said. A room like this should support an opportunity, not sit empty for sentiment. The reservation had been my grandmother's final instruction before she entered hospice, one night at the Calder Crown. Alone. Before the succession announcement, I had told Lauren only that an old family contact arranged it. She had laughed, assumed someone had upgraded me out of pity, and invited Adrian to the hotel without asking. When the front desk supervisor turned the monitor away, I caught a glimpse of the authorization line, E.J. Calder Stewardship Protocol. My legal name? My trust code. Then she clicked the window closed. I booked the room, I said, though the words sounded weak even to me. Lauren folded her arms. You didn't book this? People like us don't book this. That sentence hurt more than the stares. For years, people like us had meant two ambitious adults building a life without favors. Lately, it meant the limit she believed I had imposed on her. Adrian stepped closer. Not threatening, just intimate enough to establish that he belonged beside her. Lauren has a real chance to move into national hospitality consulting. He told me. Tonight matters. I looked at her left hand. She still wore her wedding ring, but Adrian's thumb rested briefly against the small of her back, and she did not move away. A security officer named Mason approached with the apologetic posture of someone following an order he disliked. Lauren handed him my overnight bag. Please take him to the public elevators. Adrian corrected her without looking at any sign. The service elevator will be faster from this floor. My humiliation sharpened into attention. The service elevator was hidden behind a paneled door beyond the library lounge. Guests were not supposed to know it existed. Adrian walked toward it without hesitation. I could have stopped everything with one call. Naomi Reyes, the Calder Trust's general counsel, had been sending messages for 2 hours. Samuel Grant, the hotel's general manager, would have recognized my face if he had not been upstairs with a labor delegation. But my grandmother's death had not been announced, and the transfer of voting control remained sealed until the next morning. Revealing myself in a lobby because my wife had wounded my pride would have violated both the legal plan and the one principle Margaret Calder had managed to teach me without destroying. Power used in anger always sends the bill to someone who did not earn it. So I let Mason take my bag. I let Lauren mistake restraint for helplessness. At the panel door, I placed my palm against the brass access plate. It flashed red because the guest profile had been overridden. Adrian watched with mild amusement. These systems are designed to keep unauthorized people from wandering, he said. I met his eyes. Usually they do. For the first time, his smile tightened. He knew too much about the floor, but he had not expected me to study him instead of pleading with my wife. The door opened from the other side before Mason could call engineering. Samuel Grant stood there with 2 department heads behind him, his silver hair disordered and his expression already impatient. Then he saw me. His eyes moved from my face to the bag in Mason's hand, to Lauren beside Adrian, and finally to the key packet Adrian was holding. The color left Samuel's face. Who authorized this change? He asked. Lauren answered quickly. I did. My husband won't be using the suite. Samuel ignored her and took the packet from Adrian. He scanned the barcode with his phone, and the screen reflected in his glasses. Whatever appeared there changed his posture. Not dramatically. Samuel had spent 30 years teaching staff that dignity mattered most when wealthy people were behaving badly. He handed the packet back to no one. Instead, he turned to Mason. "Mister, Cole is not to be escorted anywhere." Lauren gave a strained laugh. "There's been a misunderstanding." Samuel looked directly at me, waiting for permission I had not yet decided to give. Then, in a voice quiet enough to avoid a scene but clear enough for every person near us to hear, he said, "Mr. Caller, should I secure the presidential floor for the future chairman?" Samuel's question followed me long after the lobby fell silent. Lauren stared at me as though my face had changed, while Adrian recovered quickly enough to step between us and ask whether future chairman was some internal courtesy title. I did not answer him. I asked Samuel to restore the original reservation, keep the incident off staff reports until Naomi arrived, and place a preservation hold on every access log connected to the presidential floor. The instructions came naturally, which frightened Lauren more than any dramatic declaration could have. She knew the man who checked restaurant occupancy limits and argued with landlords about blocked exits. She did not know the man hotel executives obeyed without asking for credentials. I left the suite unused that night and sat instead in a small conference room overlooking Elliott Bay, reading the messages Naomi had sent while my marriage cracked open 20 floors below. Margaret was still alive. Barely. And the trustees expected the doctor's call before morning. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I remembered the first time Lauren saw me in an inspection vest, kneeling beside a damaged sprinkler valve in a community center. She had handed me a flashlight and said competence was more attractive than a tailored suit. I believed her because, at the time, it was true. We married 2 years later in a converted warehouse with borrowed chairs and a caterer Lauren negotiated down herself. I used my mother's surname, Cole, because the Calder name appeared in business journals, donor walls, and lawsuits involving my father. Lauren knew my grandmother owned hotels, but I described the connection as distant and broken. That was the first lie that mattered. The truth was more complicated. My father, Richard Calder, had inherited money before he inherited judgment. He treated employees like props, used company aircraft for binges, and signed guarantees he barely read. When addiction and debt consumed him, Margaret responded by controlling everything around her, including me. Her trust required 10 years of public service, financial independence, and no personal use of Calder distributions until I turned 38. She said a man who expected to lead hotels should first understand the doors ordinary people were ordered to use. I chose building safety because the work was concrete. A fire exit either opened or it did not. A load-bearing wall did not care about someone's last name. I took pride in protecting people who would never know I had been there. And Lauren once took pride in it too. The change came in increments small enough for both of us to excuse. Lauren's client list expanded. She began designing events for technology founders, professional athletes, and families whose assistants negotiated the cost of flowers. At dinners, people asked what I did, and she started answering before I could. "He works for the city," she would say, then redirect the conversation toward her latest contract. Her mother compared me to Lauren's brother-in-law, who sold a software company before turning 35. Her sister joked that my pension was my retirement strategy and Lauren's ambition was mine. I heard it, disliked it, and said nothing because I had built my entire adult life around not reacting to status. Silence felt principled to me. To Lauren, it looked like weakness. When she suggested we buy a larger house, I refused without explaining that accepting trust money would violate the succession terms. When she asked why I never introduced her to Margaret, I blamed family tension instead of admitting Margaret had insisted on evaluating Lauren from a distance. Worst of all, I began observing my own wife like an inspection site, noting every sarcastic remark and every expensive preference as evidence in a test she had never agreed to take. Adrian entered our marriage through exactly that gap. Lauren told me they first met 6 months earlier at a hotel investment reception where he praised her understanding of guest behavior and offered introductions to national clients. I had accepted the story because it required less courage than asking why his name appeared so often on her phone. In the conference room, I searched old public filings while Naomi's team secured the hotel systems. A probate petition concerning Margaret's medical incapacity had been filed under seal 8 months earlier. But a clerk's indexing error briefly exposed one line before correction. Successor beneficiary Ethan James Calder, also known professionally as Ethan Cole. The entry had been visible for 43 minutes. 3 days later, according to Lauren's archived calendar, a consultant from a Vale Meridian subsidiary invited her to speak on a hospitality panel she had never applied to join. Adrian attended that panel but did not introduce himself until weeks later, allowing the encounter to appear accidental. When Naomi arrived shortly before dawn, I showed her the dates. She studied them, then said the sentence I had spent years avoiding: "He did not find your wife by chance. Ethan, he found the only person close enough to open doors you kept locked." By sunrise, the presidential suite had become a secured evidence site instead of a symbol of everything Lauren thought I could never afford. Elena Park arrived carrying 2 laptops and the expression of someone who had already found a problem she did not want to describe in a hallway. She showed Naomi and me a series of logins made through Lauren's event planning account. The credentials had been used to view executive arrival schedules, restricted floor plans, and maintenance access routes across 4 Calder properties. Lauren had legitimate permission to review banquet spaces for client events, but someone had expanded her access through a temporary administrator token. Elena traced the token to a technology contractor hired by a Vale Meridian subsidiary. This was not casual browsing, she said. They built a map. I thought of Adrian leading us toward the hidden service elevator without checking a sign. The gesture had seemed arrogant in the moment. Now it looked rehearsed. Lauren had not handed him a key to one suite, whether she knew it or not. She had given his people a path into systems that revealed when executives traveled, where confidential meetings occurred, and which properties had physical security weaknesses. Daniel Cho joined us at company headquarters with a folder of capital reports and little patience for family drama. He had managed hotels through strikes, wildfires, and a pandemic. My name did not impress him. "Before I support any succession," he told me, "I need to know whether you can separate your marriage from the business." I told him I was trying to determine whether the business had already been pulled into my marriage. He opened the folder. Over the previous 4 months, Calder House had paid nearly $80 million to renovation vendors for projects scheduled to begin the following year. The payments were authorized by Marcus Bell, our chief financial officer, and described as discounts for early commitment. On paper, the decision could be defended. In practice, it drained cash just before several loan covenants were tested. Daniel had challenged the timing, but Marcus said Margaret approved an aggressive modernization plan before becoming ill. Naomi found no signed approval. We then traced 2 of the vendors through layers of registration records. Both were financed by a lender whose managing partner sat on an advisory board with Adrian Vale. That connection was not proof of fraud, but it turned an unusual expense pattern into a possible mechanism: weaken the company's liquidity, predict the weakness publicly, then arrive with rescue money. Elena's second finding was more direct. The presidential floor cameras had recorded continuously until 21 minutes before Lauren took my key. Then the archive jumped forward exactly 7 minutes. The edited footage released internally showed me placing my hand on the restricted elevator panel and confronting Adrian. But it omitted Lauren overriding the protected reservation and Adrian identifying the service elevator first. Elena found no sign of a system failure. Someone with administrator privileges had removed the interval and rebuilt the checksum to make the file appear untouched. "I can prove the archive was altered," she said, "but not who stood at the terminal. A separate elevator controller might have retained its own recording, though retrieving it without alerting the person responsible would take time." Naomi ordered preservation notices for every server, access badge, vendor device, and backup account connected to the floor. I asked whether Lauren could have edited the footage herself. Elena shook her head. Her account had opened the door, but the deletion required corporate security authority. That meant Adrian had an ally inside Calder House. I remembered Marcus defending Lauren's event contract at a board dinner months earlier, though I had never met him under my real name. At the time, I had dismissed it as ordinary executive networking. Now even harmless memories felt contaminated. My phone rang at 9:16 that morning. Naomi saw the number and stepped away before I answered. Giving me privacy she knew would not help. Margaret's nurse spoke gently. My grandmother had died 6 minutes earlier, without waking after the final dose of medication. I stood beside a conference room window and watched ferries cross the gray water while grief arrived in pieces too complicated to name. Margaret had protected me, controlled me, educated me, and taught me to distrust the very inheritance she had spent her life expanding. I had planned to confront her about Lauren, the succession rules, and the years she had encouraged secrecy as if isolation were proof of character. Now every argument would remain unanswered. Within an hour, Calder House announced her death and scheduled a private memorial followed by an emergency trust presentation for directors and family representatives. Naomi printed the official agenda from an encrypted system accessible to only 5 people. Before she could place it in her folder, Elena's laptop issued an alert. A document with the same internal tracking code had been opened from an external server registered to Vale Meridian's legal counsel. Adrian had obtained the inheritance agenda before most of the board knew the meeting existed. Margaret's memorial was held in the ballroom where she had once negotiated the merger that turned 3 regional hotels into an international company. Nearly 400 employees filled the room, from department heads to housekeepers who had worked for Calder House longer than I had been alive. I entered through a side corridor with Naomi and Daniel, still wearing the dark suit I had bought for my father's funeral. Lauren stood near the front beside Adrian. She had called me 17 times since the suite incident, but I had answered only once to tell her I was safe and that we would speak after the trust presentation. When the memorial ended, the employees were dismissed and the ballroom doors closed around the board. Senior executives, family representatives, and 3 journalists bound by an embargo. Naomi stepped to the lectern and displayed the legal structure Margaret had spent 20 years constructing. My immediate economic interest was 18%. The Stewardship Trust transferred another 38% of voting shares upon Margaret's death, giving me control of 56%. I also received the authority to appoint 4 of the company's 9 directors and a special veto over the sale or conversion of workforce housing properties. The room remained quiet until Naomi said my full name. Then every camera turned toward me, and Lauren whispered, "You let me think you were nobody." After the presentation, Lauren pulled me into a conference room before Naomi could stop her. Adrian remained outside, though I could see his shadow through the frosted glass. Lauren's anger was no longer the polished contempt she had shown at the hotel. It was frightened, raw, and partly deserved. 11 years, she said. I defended our life because I thought it was the life we had. Every time I worried about money, every time my family mocked you, every time I asked why you refused to plan for more, you knew none of it was real. I told her the mortgage, my salary, and the choices we made were real. But the defense sounded hollow the moment I heard it. She had betrayed me, yet I had denied her the information required to understand our marriage. I admitted that I had hidden behind Margaret's rules long after those rules stopped being the only reason. I had judged Lauren in silence, treating every frustration as evidence that she did not deserve the truth. You didn't just hide money, she said. You made me perform in a test without telling me there was a test. I could not argue. What I could say was that none of my deception required her to give our room to another man, conceal meetings, or use my humiliation as a professional offering. Her expression hardened. Adrian believed in what I could become. I looked toward the shadow outside. Adrian knew what I already was. The board reconvened that afternoon to confirm interim authority. But the discussion shifted almost immediately from succession to risk. Vivian Sloan questioned whether 10 years as a building inspector qualified me to oversee 80,000 employees and billions in debt. Her concern was legitimate, and I answered without invoking my shares. I described fire investigations where 5 separate code violations had seemed harmless until they aligned into a single path to catastrophe. Calder House, I said, faced the corporate version of that problem: accelerated payments, compromised access systems, edited records, and an outside investor offering rescue financing before the supposed crisis was public. Daniel supported an independent audit but refused to endorse me as permanent chairman until the evidence was complete. I respected him more for saying it in the room. Marcus Bell sat 3 chairs away, his face composed as he explained that early renovation payments protected the company from inflation and labor shortages. When Naomi asked for Margaret's written approval, he said the authorization had been verbal. Adrian then entered as Lauren's invited financial advisor and offered Vale Meridian's assistance in stabilizing the company. He spoke as if concern had brought him there, not preparation. Before the directors could vote on the audit, every phone in the room began vibrating. The leaked video showed me blocking the private elevator, arguing with hotel staff, and reaching toward Adrian before security intervened. The 7 missing minutes transformed restraint into aggression. Within an hour, headlines described me as a concealed heir who had threatened employees after demanding special treatment. Adrian's attorneys filed a petition questioning my fitness to administer the trust, attaching Lauren's declaration that I had maintained a false identity throughout our marriage and exhibited increasingly secretive behavior. Her statement did not accuse me of violence, but it gave the edited footage a personal history it had not earned. Naomi learned that the petition also included a succession memorandum with the Workforce Housing Protection Clause removed. She objected, but the judge assigned to the emergency hearing issued a temporary order preventing me from selling assets, replacing directors, or exercising the trust's special veto until the authenticity of the documents could be reviewed. The restriction was narrow, but Adrian needed only a narrow opening. Vale Meridian announced that it was prepared to provide emergency financing if the board acted before market confidence deteriorated. As reporters gathered outside the ballroom, Samuel handed me a copy of the altered memorandum. The missing clause had not been deleted cleanly. A faint revision mark remained beside the final paragraph, carrying the identification number of Lauren's event management portal. By the next morning, my face was on every financial network in the country. The same 6 seconds played beneath every headline, my hand striking the elevator panel, Adrian stepping back, a security officer moving between us. No one showed Lauren taking my key or ordering me removed. No one asked why the footage began after the confrontation had already started. Calder House reservations fell 12% before noon. 2 convention clients requested contract reviews, and employees began receiving messages asking whether their jobs were safe. The temporary court order prevented me from replacing Marcus, blocking the property transaction, or using my controlling shares to restructure the board. It did not prevent me from attending meetings, but every chair I entered seemed to come with the assumption that I was the crisis. Lauren gave one televised interview from her attorney's office. She did not call me violent. She did something more effective. She described years of unexplained absences, hidden family connections, and financial decisions she had never understood. "I don't know who I married," she said. The statement was true enough to survive scrutiny. Adrian appeared later as a neutral industry expert, expressing concern for employees and offering Vale Meridian's temporary bridge to preserve stability. The bridge required Calder House to sell 12 flagship properties before the end of the quarter. The board met without formally voting, careful not to violate the court's restrictions. Vivian supported exploring Adrian's proposal, not because she trusted him, but because cash forecasts prepared by Marcus showed the company falling below its lending requirements within 45 days. Daniel argued that selling profitable hotels during a manufactured panic would permanently weaken the company. When he asked me for an alternative, I had principles, suspicions, and incomplete evidence. I did not yet have a plan the board could rely on. That failure belonged to me. I had spent years preparing to inherit authority while avoiding the work of becoming visible. I knew how to trace blocked exits through a building, but I had never publicly explained how those skills translated to corporate leadership. I knew Margaret's philosophy, but I had never challenged the parts of it that damaged people. I knew Lauren had changed, but I had allowed contempt to replace conversation because exposing the truth frightened me more than losing intimacy slowly. After the meeting, I sat alone in Margaret's old office while protesters gathered below. Naomi placed a resignation letter on the desk, not hers, but one she had drafted for me. "You can step aside temporarily," she said. "An independent trustee could preserve the company while the investigation continues." For several minutes, surrender felt less like defeat than relief. Margaret's final recording was stored inside the trust archive, labeled for delivery only if I attempted to decline control. Naomi had never watched it. Neither had I. My grandmother appeared on the screen without makeup, her hands unsteady against the arms of her chair. She did not offer comfort. She admitted that after my father destroyed himself, she began confusing control with protection. She created tests because she no longer trusted love, judgment, or loyalty unless they survived deprivation. "I taught you to hide from people," she said, then called the hiding discipline. She warned me that ownership would tempt me to punish anyone who had confirmed my fears. Her instructions were not about Adrian or Lauren. The recording had been made 2 years earlier. She knew nothing of the conspiracy. What she understood was the damage her methods could produce in me. She reminded me that Calder House employed thousands of people who would never attend a board meeting and housed families who could not survive a sudden closure. "Your authority is not proof that you were right," she said. "It is an obligation to remain useful when being right feels more satisfying." When the recording ended, I tore the resignation letter in half. I was still angry at Lauren. I wanted Adrian to experience the humiliation he had designed for me. But those desires could not be allowed to determine what evidence we used or whose privacy we destroyed. I returned to the investigation the way I would have entered a damaged hotel after an alarm. Establish the timeline. Isolate each failure. And never assume the most visible defect caused the collapse. Elena recovered fragments from the elevator control server and confirmed that its backup clock ran 94 seconds behind the main security system. Daniel obtained original vendor schedules showing that Marcus had approved payments before the renovation contracts were finalized. Naomi secured a forensic copy of the altered succession memorandum and requested a court-supervised review of its metadata. I asked Samuel for the untouched reservation audit, including the exact moment Lauren's override occurred. Finally, I reviewed every board document side by side and noticed that Vivian's proxy form used broader authorization language than the form sent to other directors. She had signed permission to consider emergency financing. Adrian's lawyers had converted it into apparent approval for an asset transfer. We still lacked the final connection between him, Marcus, and the shell buyers. But the separate failures had begun forming one path. Naomi scheduled an emergency board hearing with the court-appointed trust monitor present. Reporters would attend. Adrian's counsel would challenge every document, and I would begin without hiding behind my surname or excusing what I had done to my marriage. At dawn, I entered the same ballroom where my inheritance had been announced. This time, I carried no speech about ownership, only a timeline they believed had been erased. I began the emergency hearing by giving Adrian the one thing he expected to use against me, the truth. The ballroom was crowded with directors, attorneys, the court-appointed trust monitor, employee representatives, and reporters whose cameras were trained on the man they had spent a week calling an unstable secret heir. Lauren sat behind her attorney. Adrian occupied the witness table beside Marcus, wearing the patient expression of someone waiting for an opponent to destroy himself. I told the room that I had deceived my wife about my identity, avoided difficult conversations, and accepted a succession system that treated secrecy as character. I admitted that my municipal career had not prepared me for every responsibility of leading Calder House. Then I separated those failures from the accusation before us. My dishonesty in my marriage does not make altered records authentic, I said. My lack of executive experience does not make a manufactured cash crisis real. Adrian's attorney objected that I was delivering a speech instead of presenting evidence. The trust monitor allowed me to continue. I displayed the leaked security video beside the untouched reservation audit. The public footage showed me confronting Adrian at 8:42 p.m. The audit showed Lauren overriding my protected reservation at 8:39. Adrian claimed the clocks were unsynchronized. That was the answer we had anticipated. Elena then placed the elevator controller's independent timestamp on the screen, adjusted for its documented 94-second delay. Adrian had entered the restricted corridor before the video claimed he first learned the elevator existed. The inconsistency was small, but Adrian reacted before his lawyer could stop him. That controller was not part of the hotel's security archive, he said. The room went quiet. Elena had not yet explained where the footage came from. Naomi asked how Adrian knew which server had preserved it. He leaned back and called the question meaningless. But his composure had shifted. We played the recovered elevator video. It showed Adrian guiding Lauren toward the concealed service door 7 minutes before the public recording began. It also showed Marcus entering the security office with a temporary access badge while Lauren was confronting me near the suite. Marcus said he had gone downstairs to address a guest data failure. Elena produced the incident register. No failure had been reported that night. The security terminal's audit showed that Marcus's administrator profile removed 7 minutes from the presidential floor archive and rebuilt the file checksum 14 minutes later. Adrian's attorney argued that Marcus could have acted independently. Naomi agreed that the footage alone did not prove a broader scheme. That was why Daniel presented the original renovation schedules, bank records, and vendor agreements. The two contractors receiving accelerated payments had borrowed their operating capital from a lender controlled by Vail Meridian's acquisition partner. Calder House had transferred millions before final contracts existed, creating the shortage Marcus later described to the board as an unforeseeable emergency. Marcus stared at the documents as Daniel traced the money through 3 limited liability companies. He still denied receiving instructions from Adrian. Then Naomi opened the altered succession memorandum. Its visible revision history had been erased. But the forensic metadata retained 2 identification numbers, Lauren's event management portal and a temporary corporate account generated from Marcus's credentials. Lauren's attorney rose immediately and stated that Lauren had never been authorized to modify trust documents. Elena confirmed that her portal had been used remotely from an address assigned to Vail Meridian's legal consultants. Adrian dismissed the connection as evidence that an outside attacker had compromised multiple systems. Vivian Sloan interrupted him. She placed her proxy packet on the table and asked why the version filed by his attorneys authorized the sale of real estate when the form she signed mentioned only emergency financing. Naomi projected both documents. The signature was genuine, but the authorization page had been replaced. A printer tracking code linked the substituted page to Marcus's executive office. Around the table, the directors who had viewed Adrian as a possible rescuer began closing their folders. Adrian abandoned his calm tone. He accused me of using inherited influence to intimidate witnesses and create a conspiracy from routine financial decisions. I told him my shares had not produced a single document. His own systems, contracts, and partners had done that. The final evidence came from a source I had resisted using until Naomi confirmed that it contained corporate planning rather than private intimacy. Lauren's event company automatically transcribed strategy meetings for client summaries. Months earlier, she had hosted Adrian and 2 consultants in her office. She deleted the visible file after Adrian called the discussion confidential. But the platform's lawful retention system preserved a corporate backup. Lauren looked at me when Naomi introduced it, and I could see that she did not know what it contained. The recording began with plans to position Vail Meridian as the only available lender after the covenant breach. Adrian described the 12 hotels as the clean assets and the workforce housing division as land that could be freed from sentimental restrictions. One consultant asked whether Lauren understood the succession structure. Adrian answered that she did not need to understand it. She was useful because my secrecy had made her angry, and anger made access feel like independence. Then came the sentence that ended every illusion she had defended, once the sale closed. Lauren would be removed from the transaction because the spouse is an access channel, not a long-term partner. She covered her mouth but did not cry. Adrian claimed the recording had been manipulated. Elena provided the platform's cryptographic verification and the court-authorized preservation order. Marcus asked for a private conference with his attorney. 10 minutes later, he agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. Adrian still had one final mechanism. As the board prepared to reject his financing proposal, his lawyers transmitted notices claiming that the purchase rights had already been assigned to an overseas investment vehicle and that Calder House would owe a 9-figure termination payment if the sale failed. Naomi had expected the move. The supposed rights depended on Vivian's altered proxy, the falsified succession memorandum, and Marcus's undisclosed conflict of interest. A federal magistrate, reviewing our independent audit and Elena's data theft report, issued a temporary freeze on the shell companies and their related accounts while regulators examined potential wire fraud, fiduciary breaches, and securities manipulation. The directors unanimously rejected the asset transfer. The trust monitor recommended lifting the restrictions on my voting authority, subject to independent oversight and a formal leadership review. I accepted both conditions. I did not terminate Lauren's contracts from the stage, release her private messages, or describe the details of her relationship with Adrian. I stated only that our marriage would be handled through counsel and that evidence unrelated to criminal or corporate misconduct would remain private. As officers escorted Adrian from the ballroom for questioning, he looked at me as though restraint were another form of weakness. Perhaps. Once, I would have agreed. But when the employee representative stood and Daniel placed the original housing protection clause back into the official record, I understood what Margaret had tried too late to teach me. Ownership had opened the door. Evidence had won the fight. Refusing to become cruel was the first decision that made the authority mine. 18 months after the emergency hearing, I stood before a different Calder House board, one with independent audit authority, employee representation, and rules preventing any chairman from controlling information the way Margaret once had. The company had recovered most of the business lost during the scandal. We refinanced the legitimate debt without selling the 12 flagship hotels, canceled the manipulated renovation contracts, and restored the cash reserves Marcus had helped drain. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy and unauthorized system access after providing investigators with records connecting Vale Meridian to the shell buyers. Adrian fought every charge until 3 former consultants agreed to testify. He eventually accepted a federal plea involving wire fraud, data theft, and attempted commercial bribery. I attended none of the sentencing hearings. Accountability did not require me to watch him lose everything. Lauren and I finalized our divorce through mediation. She received the assets she had fairly earned during our marriage, but no interest in the Calder Trust, which had always been protected by its structure and our prenuptial agreement. Before signing the final papers, she told me she had blamed Adrian because admitting her own choices was harder. I told her I had blamed Margaret's rules for a secrecy I had continued willingly. We apologized without asking those apologies to rebuild what we had broken. Leadership did not make me abandon the work that had kept me grounded. 2 Fridays each month. I still taught emergency planning workshops with the Municipal Safety Department. My staff stopped treating those days as a sentimental hobby after one of our older airport hotels failed a surprise evacuation drill. The problems were not dramatic: a storage cart near a stairwell, an outdated guest assistance list, and employees unsure who had authority to override an elevator during a fire. Small failures, aligned in the wrong order, could still become disasters. That lesson shaped more than our safety program. We created anonymous reporting channels, separated the chief financial officer's authority from vendor approval, and required directors to receive transaction documents from an independent source. Daniel became chief executive after the board completed a national search that included candidates more experienced than either of us. I remained chairman. Responsible for long-term stewardship rather than pretending inheritance had made me the best operator in every room. Vivian stayed on the board and became one of my strongest critics. Naomi called that progress. I agreed. Loyalty without disagreement had nearly destroyed the company once. Our most important decision involved the extended stay properties Adrian had described as sentimental land. Instead of selling them, We transferred 8 into a nonprofit network that provided temporary lodging for traveling nurses, families of hospitalized children, and workers displaced by fires or floods. We named the training program after No Calder. Margaret had built remarkable things, but I no longer believed every good act needed to preserve a family name. At the Seattle flagship, the private elevator that Adrian had used during my humiliation was removed from executive-only service. The paneled corridor beyond it became the entrance to the Calder House Opportunity Center, where housekeepers, maintenance workers, cooks, and front desk employees could earn management credentials with full tuition support. On opening day, Samuel Grant handed the first access card to a laundry supervisor who had worked at the hotel for 19 years. I watched her press the brass plate where my palm had once triggered a red denial light. This time, the doors opened onto classrooms filled with people who had spent their careers being directed towards service entrances. I did not need the building to recognize my name anymore. It mattered more that the door recognized theirs.